All right, we're back for part 2 of our 3D modeling of a Cubesat, a 3U Cubesat in Blender. So for this segment, we're going to focus on what we built last time was the body of a 3U Cubesat based off of that reference image. And you'll notice that those the additional panels that articulate off the body that are present in a reference image, we're going to want to add those to our model. So Ed, why don't we dive right in?
Okay. Actually, first I'm going to hit save as, because I'm obsessive about having points to go back to if things go sideways later on. So here we have what we built in part 1, which is our Cubesat body. And I'm going to take a piece of this and copy it off to be one of those flaps on the side. Let's hit edit on this. One of the first things I'm thinking of now is that I think we are done with our array modifier. The array modifier, when we get into fancy PBR materials, I'm not going to want whatever texture ends up on the top of this thing to be repeated 4 times, rotated 4 ways. So I think we're going to have to be done with our array modifier. I'll go back to object mode. I'm going to hit apply on the main array modifier. And now this whole model is all one piece. It's all one thing, one mesh, I suppose. And it's all editable individually now. So with that done, I'm going to grab one side of it. I think I will grab the front side here, and we'll use X-ray vision so we can see this a little better. I don't want to grab the side rails. I just want to grab this the circuit board. So let's hit Alt-A to deselect. Wow, that got very dark for me. Let's... all right. I'm going to hit Shift. Yes. Okay. So I deselected the thing I wanted selected. And now I'm going to hit Control-I to select just that. So now I've got my circuit board and the solar panels on the front here. I will hit, actually first I'm going to turn X-ray off, and then I'll hit Shift-D to duplicate them like so. And I'm going to pull them out into a separate object. And the reason I'm pulling them into a separate object is because that flap can articulate. It can move independently from the main body. So it needs to be a separate mesh with a separate object. So I do separate selection. And now let's rename this. I'm calling it flap 1 for now.
That is the technical term for it, I believe.
That's the technical term, yeah. I think, yeah, for that website. I think so. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to click flap 1. I'm going to hold down the control key and click on Cubesat. And I have a sort of a darker orange and a lighter yellow. The darker ones are the selected objects, and there can be more than one. The lighter yellow one is the quote-unquote active object, of which there is only one. So with that arrangement, I now hit Control-P, and all of the selected objects have the active object now as their parent. And I will expand that so we can see. Can I move this down? Yes. Okay.
Okay. So in other words, if we were to rotate that Cubesat body, that flap 1 would also just...
It should come along for the ride, and of course it's embedded in there in a way that we can't see right now.
All right, let's fix that.
Let's fix that. So I'm going to take flap 1. I'm going to remember to go into edit mode this time before I move it, because I'm not ready to move its origin just yet. I'm going to look from above, and I'm going to use G, and I'm going to limit my movement to the y-axis, and I'm going to move it right here to the other side. So I've moved it across to this side. And the reason I've done that is I want the solar panels to face in. If you remember from our other reference photo, when this thing is closed, all the solar panels sort of face inward, and the back side is just sort of blank. So that's what I'm going to try to replicate here. And let's look at it from the side and see how close we got. we got pretty close. Let's make it a round number. 105. Yeah.
Looks good.
Looks good. All right. So the other issue I'm having is that this thing, although it looks like it has a back, it actually does not have a back. So we're going to give it one. And I think I'm sure there's a million better ways to do this, but I'm just going to do this kind of the hard way, if you will. I'm going to hit Alt-click on one of these. Alt, again, it's trying to select that edge loop. And it looks like, in this case, it got all 6 edges all the way around the back. So we can even see if I zoom in. Yep, it got all 6 edges around the back. So I'm going to hit F for fill. And it filled that whole thing with 1 polygon. And I'm not sure that I wanted 1 polygon. I think I wanted 2 polygons there. So I'm going to grab the top vertex, and I'm going to grab this vertex, and I will hit J to put a slice there. And now we have 2 polygons.
Now, what's the purpose of having 2 polygons there?
Just because otherwise, just because the other ones have that same shape. The ones facing outward have that vertical split down the middle. It's kind of an artifact from when we did our array modifier. But I didn't want the back of this to be sort of a 6 vertex n-gon for no reason and have the triangulator mess it up later. So I just put a slice down the middle so it looks like the other ones. And you'll notice it's not circuit board material, so we do need to fix that. I'm going to go to face select mode, and we do have 0 faces selected, so let's turn off X-ray and select these 2 faces. And we will assign them the circuit board material. There we go. Very nice. Anything else we need from our...
So there's that little... Let's add a little interesting detail. You see that metal bump out that's on the reference image?
Yeah, this thing here.
Yeah.
Let's add that. All right. We can add that pretty similar to the way we added a solar panel. I'm going to grab my cursor and stick it on here somewhere. And I'm going to tell my cursor that it needs to be centered on the x-axis with a 0. And with that, I will add a plane there. And I'm going to face that plane and tell it to face me. Let's see here. Did I add?
It's a bit more rectangular in the reference.
Yeah, and I was not in edit mode when I did it, so it's an object, unfortunately. So let's merge it into that flap. I'm going to take the plane and the flap and Control J. I did not mean to make that an object, but fixing mistakes is the best way to learn Blender. Do the wrong thing and then whoops, and then fix it up.
We want to demonstrate how that...
Yes, we want to demonstrate lots of mistakes intentionally up here. Yes. No, we didn't. So here's our plane. Let's see if I can select... selecting it may be tricky. No, it won't be tricky. I'll just take this vertex and hit Control L, and I'll have my plane selected. No.
I guess we want to scale that down?
Yeah, we're going to scale this a little bit. And I'm going to scale it on the z-axis a little bit. And we'll slide it with GZ on the z-axis.
Okay, so I see Zfighting again.
Yep, Zfighting means it's right in line with the circuit board behind it. But it looks like it's about the correct size,
so
more or less.
For the panels, we extruded those cells. For the cells, we extruded them out. Would we do that again here and delete a backface, or?
I was thinking of something different. I'm going to use a different function called inset. So I hit the letter I, and I'm going to make an inset. And it makes another panel inside of this one, but it does not produce a backface. So it's still 2-dimensional and it's still Zfighting. But it made the right sort of shape of what I think I'm seeing in this image. And then from that, I can then slide that. See, the green line is the y-axis. So I'm going to hit G for grab and Y for the y-axis. And we can just slide it out just a little bit
Okay.
on the y-axis.
I'm going to ask you a question that we have not prepared for. What do you think what's the functionality of that metal piece there?
Oh, I have no idea.
Battery. No.
Counterweight, maybe, of some sort?
I'm going to say it's a pocket.
A pocket where they keep snacks in there?
Yeah.
Like Kerbal Space Program.
Yeah.
Clearly.
All right. Yeah. So we are experts
Yes.
in 3D graphics.
In 3D graphics, not in aerospace technology. All right. So we have our little metal thing on there.
Pocket.
Our pocket. We've
Yes.
added the pocket. Yes. And now I think I want to add the hinge at the top.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, let's find the right place for the hinge. The hinge, I think I'm going to go select these two vertices right here at the top. And I think that is going to be my hinge point. So I will...
All right. So we're just going to put a cylinder, a little rod here as an abstraction for a hinge mechanism.
Sure. And I also am going to set the origin for flap 1 there so that when flap 1 moves, it moves from that point. But I'm going to start by snap. I'm going to do a snap cursor to selected. And it's going to take my 3D cursor and place it between these two vertices that I selected. And that midpoint there is going to be the actual hinge point where this whole thing moves from that hinge point. So now I'm going to go back to object mode. And I'm going to set the origin right there to the 3D cursor. So flap 1's origin is now there.
Can we back out? Can we just do a little rotation, see what that looks like?
And see what happens?
Yeah.
Sure. So we'll...
Do we have the flap selected? Okay.
We have flap 1 selected. I'm in object mode. And I'm going to rotate this red line as the x-axis. So I'm going to rotate on the red axis.
Perfect.
And you can see the flap opening.
All right.
Just like that. And it should produce solar panels sort of above and below, and we do that. And then it closes up like that. So let's, for now, I'm going to 0 that rotation, and we are going to add a little circle in here. And the circle that I'm adding is way, way too big. So we will make it smaller. And I think I'm going to look at this from the side.
Okay, so using the number pad to kind of change to those orthographic views.
Yes. I'm using the number pad to flip around, and I would like this to align to my view, and it is still far too big. I'm going to add another 0 in there. That's actually a tiny bit too small now. There, it's intersect now. It's at a point where it's intersecting a little bit the body of the CubeSat, but I think that's okay because this is, we're hoping that people aren't going to zoom in and try and understand the mechanism of how this hinge actually works. That the goal is to have a CubeSat that can be seen from a distance and look like a CubeSat. Mm-hmm. So having a complete mechanically functional hinge here is going to be overkill. And in fact, even having 32 vertices on here is overkill. I'm going to probably drop that let's drop it to 16. Just in the hopes that no one zooms in too close to look at what this thing is. I am going to stick an end-gun cap on there. And we need to extrude it out. So let's extrude along the x-axis.
Negative 0.4 looks, or 0.35, okay.
0.35. Oh, that was, all right. Once again, I'm editing these numbers to be semi-round numbers because I want to copy it to the other side. So let's, 0.35. So let's grab this and move it the same distance. Should be 3.5. And I could be, there's better ways to do everything. There's different ways. I could be using a mirror modifier. There's all sorts of ways to make sure that what you're doing stays symmetrical. But one thing I want to point out, I've got the disco ball effect on here. So this whole thing needs to be smooth shaded, just like the other one was. And I want you to pay attention to the whole thing. When I hit smooth shading, object, smooth shade, we get a very nice smooth shading here on the hinge stand-in cylinder, because we copied that object, so we still have auto smooth turned on. But we have a problem down here now, where we created the pocket, as you called it. It too has become smooth shaded. And what's worse, its angles are so shallow that it would be hard for me to reduce this number enough to make these things into sharp edges without, a number of other things becoming sharp as well. Our cylinder has actually steeper edges on it than this pocket does. So that smooth angle, there's no more space between the shallowest sharp edge and the sharpest smooth edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the pocket and I'm going to mark it as sharp. And those edges get marked as sharp edges, and then we know that they should not be smoothed over by the lighting calculations. But the cylinder, which has actually even sharper edges, should be smoothed over because it's a stand-in for a round object. So there's flap 1. And we're almost done with our geometry here. I am going to do one extra thing specifically for SDK, the Systems Toolkit. In SDK, there's the ability to compute solar power tools. So I want to bust out the actual electricity generating surfaces as their own separate objects.
Right. In a later segment, we'll get into how you can mark up glTF models via extensions to annotate certain meshes as having properties that SDK cares and knows about, such as Ed mentioned, solar panel efficiency. So we'll want those as their own meshes, as separate meshes.
Yep. So I'm going to select these and separate by selection. And this thing is now body solar panels. And I'm going to parent it just so... the reason I'm parenting, by the way, all these things is sometimes we'll apply an articulation or a transformation of some kind to a root node or to the body of a vehicle. And I want all the other parts of the vehicle to come along for the ride when it does that. This thing here is the Cubesat mesh. I'm going to go to town renaming things just to keep things semi-organized around here. This is body solar panels mesh. And likewise on flap 1 here, I'm going to call this, for now, I'll call it flap 1 mesh. But we need to, are we in, yes. Let me turn off the main Cubesat and the main thing. So here in flap 1, I need to select its solar panels and pull them free as well. And they are actually going to be a child of flap 1, like so. And they are flap 1 solar panels, and their mesh is going to be flap 1 solar panel mesh. Okay, so I have a whole hierarchy of things now. So I've renamed a couple of things here, and we have our flap that if we're in object mode, we should be able to still rotate this flap. Nope. Once again, object mode, flap 1 needs to be selected. I had the wrong thing selected. So we should be able to rotate the flap and get it to open and close. Yes, this is good. So we want to add 3 more of these, I suppose. Mm-hmm. I'm going to manually move my 3D cursor back to the global origin here.
Right. So when we had to duplicate, replicate symmetrical geometry, we'd use the array modifier.
Yes, we would.
Yeah,
wouldn't we?
probably. But knowing that our intended use in SDK, I don't think we want to do that.
We don't want to do that here. And in fact, I think for the sake of it, I will pose this flap. I think
Let's match the reference image. So we'll get, yes.
135, which is 45 degrees plus 90. That gives us that upward diagonal. I think that's a good pose for it. And you mentioned the array modifier. I'm not going to stick an array modifier on this because I want these flaps to be able to move in different directions. So they, if I were to put the array modifier on, then when this main flap closed, the other three would sort of be torn off their hinges.
Right, because they would all be in one object?
They would all be in one object. And what we need is 4 different hinge points, and they all move relative to their own individual hinge points. Mm-hmm. And to make those hinge points happen, they need to be objects in the scene, not just all one mesh. So that's what we're going to do. And then we're going to do an extra trick on top of that, which I will show you in one moment. So I'm going to start by selecting my flap and my solar panels. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to do a little material cleanup. Since we broke the solar panels out, I'm going to select the Cubesat. The Cubesat, as you recall, it doesn't have any solar panels anymore. I can safely delete that. And likewise, from the solar panel object that's a child of the Cubesat, it doesn't have these other two materials. It only has a solar panel material. So I'm doing a little bit of cleanup of my list of material slots. And sure, the glTF exporter should automatically do that too, but this will be useful later when we start trying to bake things and deal with these materials. So the flap 1 doesn't have any solar panels, and then the flap 1 solar panels don't have anything that's not a solar panel, like that. Okay, so now I'm ready to start duplicating things. So we will select both flap 1 and its solar panels, and we will set our center of rotation to be the 3D cursor, which is at the global origin there. And now I'm going to hit Shift-D to duplicate the object. We're in object mode. Right-click to drop it. Rotate. I'm going to rotate on the Z-axis, and I'm going to type in 90 degrees and hit Enter. So we'll do that a couple more times. Rotate 90, Z, and then duplicate, right-click, rotate, Z, 90, Enter. So we have all these many flaps, and I don't like the naming scheme. I want them to be called flap 2, 3, and 4, like this. And the next thing I'm going to show is that these things all have their own copies of the mesh that's there. But once again, I don't want them to have their own mesh. Did I seriously mess up something? I did, didn't I? Something looks wrong. Here's flap 1. I think that our pocket ended up in the solar panel somehow. It's easy enough to fix. Control L. Separate it out. I'm not sure how it ended up there. I must have still had it selected when I tried and selected the solar panels. Once again, mistakes in Blender can be often corrected. Make backups anyway, though. So I've merged it in here, back to flap 1, and it should now, good guess, but no. All of this is our frame material. Assign, please. Okay. Did we get? Yes, I think flap 1 is corrected. The others are not, but flap 1 is back into a working state. And the others, I don't want to have to manually apply changes and fixes. And also, when I apply the materials to flap 1, I want them to carry over to the others as well. So what I'm going to do is, instead of calling this flap 1 mesh, I'm just going to call it flap mesh. We're going to share a mesh between objects. And likewise, the flap 1 solar panel mesh will just be a flap solar panel mesh. And then all of these other guys, let's say flap 2, we'll go to the meshes. They can all share that same flap mesh and flap solar panel mesh. So let's... and you'll notice they should actually be getting fixed as I do this. They should be getting copies of that change that I made to the 1, because they're actually, it's different objects in different locations reusing the same mesh.
So when we author materials later, that's also less real estate that we need in the UV map.
That's right.
Excellent.
Right, because we won't have to unwrap them separately. Essentially, we'll only have to apply materials to flap 1, and then the other 3 flaps are just going to be copies, movable copies of flap 1.
Right. So the flap 4, the object, well, I'll talk while you're updating these meshes, is really just storing the transform of where that mesh is to be drawn.
Right. And that's a good way to think about it. Is that, yes. Actually, let me rename the object as well. This is 4. Right, so the objects hold the transforms, and the meshes hold the geometry, and the 2 are independently movable. Flap 3. So my objects have these names, flap 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the meshes, well, the 1 mesh is reused, and Blender even tells us that I used the flap mesh 4 times, and I used flap solar panel mesh 4 times, and that's reassuring that I didn't mess that part up. Okay. So there we have all the pieces of this, and I think with that we are done with the initial cut of modeling the geometry of this thing. And in our next video, we'll take on assigning some materials and making this look a little more realistic.
Right. So we'll dive into PBR, material authoring in Blender, and how you hook those up and get those picked up by the glTF exporter.
That's right.
All right. Thank you.